question I think we want to start with is trying to better understand how our social and cultural interactions work together with the genetic aspects of who we are, what make us up as people, to grow our brains, and in what ways we should be thinking about that question specifically around adolescence.
So I think I'll start by saying two things. First, that's exactly the question that we're struggling to answer in science. The honest truth is we really don't understand how genes grow a human, right? There are little pieces. We know how fingers get turned on, you know what I mean, and turned off, like, and why snakes don't have them. They're missing this one gene, you know what I mean? Like that kind of thing. But in terms of how the genetic differences that lead to certain kinds of predispositions or talents, right, or potentials, where those come from, we really don't know. But we do see hints that it does partly come from genetics for things, many kinds of propensities or neural sort of, people call them divergences, but I think that's a strange way to say it, because we're all divergent. I mean, nobody's the same. Like, divergent from what? From like the average, when you take everybody and add them all together and divide by the number of people? Like, what does that even mean, right? But I mean, like, there's a lot of variation in the population, and that variation gives rise to different kinds of potentials. So how exactly that happens, we don't know, right? But we see that it does. Certain kinds of potentials do seem to be passed through family lineages, even when, bad for bad, for good, right? Usually for both, depending on how it's used. It's just, we have something when we squint and we look at the patterns of family and talents moving across generations, where you can see things that kind of teach us something about the variation across people in the potentials we bring. Let's put it that way. But for educators, I think we can't sort of do anything about that, right? That's kind of not what we should be worried about, because that's not something that we control or that we understand at this point. And even if we did, who would we be to decide what kinds of opportunities to give somebody based on what we think they should be able to do? Like, right? That's a super problematic kind of approach, because like what you should be able to do has everything to do with the kinds of resources your ancestors had and all kinds of stuff, right? That we can, like, we're having the debate right now about whether elite colleges should use, legacy as a factor for letting people in, right? I mean, there's a whole bunch of reasons why that is not fair, right? And so what do you do as educators who are equity minded, whose orientation to the work really should be, how do I build out a context? How do I orchestrate opportunities such for the kids under my care, my tutelage, such that they can make of themselves what they are inclined to make of themselves? How can we set them up to have access to the kinds of opportunities and relationships and information and patterns of interaction that enable them to figure their way into their talents and sort of actualize those talents through their own work? That's a very constructivist kind of approach, but it's also a very sort of Vygotskian context-dependent approach. I mean, it's not an accident. I trained in grad school with Kurt Fisher, right, who really reconciled Piagetian constructivism with Vygotskian context dependency and cultural learning, and found a way to actually integrate those in a theory in which people are constructing knowledge, but they're doing it in a cultural context, So I think as educators, you also bring this is sort of another side of it. I think you bring a really important lens to the problem of understanding how genetic and opportunistic ways of engaging in the world for people, especially young people, but all people, right, can like how different kinds of people, the ways in which they manage to recognize and then leverage opportunities and run with them to make themselves into something special or to do something. That's something that if you can learn to see those patterns and enable those patterns without overly constraining them to fit your own hypotheses, it could actually really be a major contribution to science. You are the ones who are really familiar with the patterns kids show of growth and development and emotion and relationships and ways of making meaning that the scientists do not have access to in the same way you do. So to try to build out a really ecologically valid science that's representative of the ways that young people and all humans engage with their worlds to build themselves and their skills into something over time is got to be an interdisciplinary exercise, an exercise in which we integrate together your voices with the scientific approaches to try to understand how we could meet in the middle to have new insights. And that's, in fact, why I'm so interested in engaging in these conversations with you. It's not so that I can take the science that we've discovered and tell you about it, so now we'll tell you what to do, right? Instead, it's so that we can say, well, here's the way it appears to us, teach us what you know, and let's try to figure out if we can make a way to think about these things where we're leveraging each other's insights to have deeper understanding on either side of the fence.